So now that we've spoken about the general circulation of the atmosphere, let's talk about how climate change is going to impact this. We're starting off talking about global warming, higher temperatures. Basically, the general circulation of the atmosphere is related to the water cycle, as we saw where we have convergence and rising air in the tropics or at 50, 60 degrees. That's where we have lots of rainfall and storms. Other places, we have sinking air, 30 degrees where we have drying out. And so how does the temperature going to affect what happens with the general circulation and in general with the water cycle? So first of all, if we look on the area where we're having sinking motion, higher temperatures are basically going to result in more evaporation, both from the oceans, but also from the land, from plants. And higher evaporation will increase the risk of droughts, of heat waves, wildfires. When we have dry conditions in the vegetation, it's more likely we'll have fires. So places where we don't have lots of rainfall, increasing temperature will actually result in more evaporation and things will become drier, more heat waves, and this can be associated with the fires. On the other hand, higher temperatures also result in more evaporation of moisture and more moisture itself in the atmosphere. Warm air can actually hold more water vapor, and therefore when we do have storms, both in the tropics and high latitudes, there's simply more water which can come out of the atmosphere. You can think of it like a sponge, which you can squeeze the sponge and the water comes out. The more water in that sponge, the more rainfall we're going to have. And this can result in lots of flooding. We've seen in the recent years flooding in Pakistan, in Europe, in other regions where we've always had storms there, but now the storms have simply got more water in the atmosphere, and this results in flooding. So if we look at the forecasts of what may happen by the end of the century, here we can see the simulations for the end of the century for December, January, February on the top left, and for June, July, August in the right. And what we're seeing here is the change in rainfall. The blue areas, the blue and green areas, are where we can expect an increase in rainfall, up to, say, 20% increase in rainfall. And the brown and orange regions are where we can expect up to 20% decrease in rainfall. And what we see is, unlike with the temperatures, which are every place is getting warmer and warmer, here we can see when we talk about rainfall, and this is related again to the general circulation of the atmosphere, some areas are going to get much drier in the future, and other areas are going to get much wetter. And if we look closely at this plot, you can see little black dots on the maps. And this is where the models from the IPCC reports, where 95% of them agree with each other. And so this is where we have a lot more certainty in the forecasts. Either all the models are wrong, or at least we trust the models in these regions. Other areas where you don't have the black dots, we're simply averaging 30, 40 models together to show the results. But where we have the little black dots, this is where we have a lot more confidence in the forecasts. And particularly if we look in Israel or the Mediterranean, December, January, February is when we have our rainfall. And in the Mediterranean, we can see that the models predict a significant drying of up to 20% decrease in rainfall by the end of the century. And we're already noticing this in many places in the Mediterranean, in Italy, in Spain, Portugal, Greece, as well as in Israel. We're seeing decreasing trends in rainfall, and this is resulting in drought conditions, heat waves, and lots of wildfires. If we look at what's happened recently in Portugal and in Spain, huge amounts of fires. And the same we can see also, say, in California. And if we look at some examples, it's happening. You can look at the Hoover Dam in the United States, the extreme drought which has been happening in the last years in the United States. One part of the world is getting drier. Other parts, like in China, are getting huge amounts of rainfall. Pakistan are being flooded. And so the forecast for the future for climate change is for the hydrological cycle to simply get more extreme. Areas which are normally dry are going to get much drier, and areas which are normally wet are going to get much wetter. Both of them are not good. When you have too much water or too little water, it's not good. And if we look at some of the forecasts from the IPCC for both heavy rain and dry conditions, here we can see some statistics of what may happen as the climate warms by 1 degree, 1.5 to 4 degrees. And here we can see, for example, the the frequency of very intense rainfall events, events which may occur, say, from 1850 to 1900 once every 10 years, somewhere on the planet. If we have a very intense rainfall event once every 10 years, as the temperature increases, these are going to become more and more frequent. By the time we get to 4 degrees warming, we'll have maybe every 3 times or 2.7 times every decade we'll have such intense precipitation events. That's about the frequency, and the bottom part of the plot shows us about the intensity of the rainfall. So not only are they going to have more frequent flooding events, but the actual events are going to become more intense with time. We can see that for a 1 degree warming, which is the situation more or less today, we can expect an additional 6.7% increase in the intensity of these storms. By the time we get to a 4 degree warming, they're going to be 30% stronger, these storms, with 30%, say, more precipitation occurring than we would see in the present climate. And if we look for the extreme dry events, which have obviously strong impacts on agriculture, ecological systems, and eventually fires, here we see also a similar pattern, that if we look at the situation in the past where we had one extreme drought every 10 years on the planet, if we go up to 4 degrees warming in the future, we'll have maybe 4 extreme events like we had in the past every decade. And these also, according to the bars in the bottom, are going to get more and more intense as the climate gets warmer. So we're going to see this, the climate is going to become more extreme. We're going to have more frequent flooding events, more frequent drought events, but they're also going to be more intense in the future. And the more the globe warms, the more intense these are going to get.